Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Is That a Credible Claim? How do we show it? How do we prove it? Today's claim was made by Winston Peters when answering a question from Carmel Cepoloni about the increased amount of methamphetamine found in our wastewater in 2024. The comparison was made between 2024 and 2023, and Winston Peters claimed that those were COVID years and that you had to go back to the years before COVID to actually do a proper comparison, and then the suggestion is that you would see a completely different result. And only an academic would actually think like that, and Labour MPs weren't very clever. Consider the following footage.
Does he agree with Christopher Luxon regarding methamphetamine? Quote, "We're going to be really tough on that. I mean, we have to get to the suppliers," end quote. If so, has that objective been achieved, given that the wastewater testing suggests a 96% nationwide increase in meth use in the 2024 year?
Now, that's a fascinating question, because the first thing that judgment's been made about in 2024 is the COVID years, when we were locked down everywhere. And to use that as the base for comparative figures seems attractive until you realise it had to be the pre-COVID years first, and then 20. Well, I know it's 24 that we're talking about, but the basis against which the comparison was made was in the lockdown years, and that's the point. Now, if you're an academic, you'd know that, but if you're a superficial politician, you'll go for the first gotcha answer and hope you're going to make it. But it's not going to work out.
So, if Winston Peters is correct, we should be able to look at the record of the COVID years versus the pre-COVID years and see a marked difference between the levels of methamphetamine in our wastewater. So let's do that. So here's the chart that shows the blue line is methamphetamine in our wastewater, and it's over the period of 2019, which was pre-COVID, through 2020 all the way up to 2024. Doesn't a picture tell 1,000 words? Right, so in the pre-COVID year of 2019, you can see the blue line is hovering around about 600 milligrams of methamphetamine per 1,000 people on average. It's a flat line. Then as we move into Q1 of 2020, when COVID arrived, there's a short decline into Q2, which was a lockdown period. And then the levels kind of stabilize back to around about 550, quite close to where they were before COVID arrived here. And the same thing happens as you get into 2021. Curiously, in Q2 and Q3 of 2021, the methamphetamine levels in our water rose to something like 750 milligrams, and that was during the Auckland lockdowns, which occurred all the way through that period. So there wasn't some correlation necessarily between COVID lockdowns and the amount of meth in the water. So the blue line carries on, and it gradually declines a little bit down towards Q1 of 2023, but it soon bounces back for Q2, Q3 and Q4, which is most of 2023, which is the year that is being compared to 2024. As you can see, for Q2, Q3 and Q4 of 2023, the results are not too much different from what they were back in 2019. They're probably around 550, which is pretty close to the 600 mark, maybe a slightly lower amount, but not greatly different. Then in Q4 of 2023, that's when Christopher Luxon, Nicola Willis and Mark Mitchell stepped into power. Pretty much immediately there's a bit of a rise in methamphetamine use, but it stays roughly around that same area in Q1 of 2024. It's not until the cuts begin seriously around Q2 of 2024, cuts to customs staff, the ones that manage the border and prevent and protect us from methamphetamine, that you start to see a massive increase that hadn't been seen pre-COVID or after COVID during any lockdown. In fact, you're seeing a world record increase under Christopher Luxon, Mark Mitchell and Nicola Willis because of their cuts. That increase of methamphetamine coming into the country is not about restoring law and order. That's about letting law and order go crazy. And if the gangs are supplying that methamphetamine around New Zealand, then what we're seeing is an absolute boom in business for the gangs. The gangs are doing so well under Mark Mitchell. They're busting. They're doing great guns. Let's have a look one more time at what Winston said about pre-COVID levels.
Given that the wastewater testing suggests a 96% nationwide increase in meth use in the 2024 year.
Now, that's a fascinating question, because the first thing that judgment is made about in 2024 is the COVID years, when we were locked down everywhere. And to use that as the base for comparative figures seems attractive until you realise it had to be the pre-COVID years first, and then 20. Well, I know it's 24 that we're talking about, but the basis against which the comparison was made was in the lockdown years, and that's the point. Now, if you're an academic, you'd know that, but if you're a superficial politician, you'll go for the first gotcha answer and hope you're going to make it. But it's not going to work out.
So I think it's pretty obvious that Winston was guilty of being misleading in Parliament here. His claim was false. It was a distraction. But basically, he's wrong. And I think everyone that votes for NZ First has to put their hand up and say, look, Winston, you're wrong on this one. You're underinformed. You don't know what you're talking about. You're making a bloody fool of yourself. But that's actually all that I have here for today's episode of Is That a Credible Claim? And this one wasn't. And I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and evening tonight. See you guys later.